Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and today I want to talk about managing Wargame admin, paperwork or tokens. So I recently mentioned that I prefer to keep in-game admin on the table rather than as off the table paperwork. And I thought it was worth discussing it a little bit more in depth today. Varied methods for displaying information, conditions that exist in different rule sets, and what our preferences might be. You know, most games have some form of admin to consider, something that needs to be recorded as the game goes along. And there'll be no correct answer, everyone will have a different opinion on it, I imagine, but that it may be related to how old you are and perhaps what games you first started playing with, but we will all probably have a different view on what we like to see on the table or off the table. So I'm going to come back to this and have a look at this. So how do you feel about the use of tokens and in-game devices such as roster sheets and orders of battle and so on? So before discussing my preference, I think it's worth briefly discussing what I mean by in-game admin. Define the term before we start talking about preferences. So really, for me, in-game admin is anything that needs to be recorded or tracked, that can and things, particularly things that change during the game, so that they need to be logged in some way or represented in some way. But also things like basic stats that may not change but may be very different from one unit to the next. So you need some way of being able to record that so that players can look that information up. And ultimately, all of this information needs to be displayed to the players and to the umpire in some form. And the choice for any game system is how to do that. Broadly, for me, I think that comes into really two different types of... For tabletop games, it falls into two categories. You either go down the road of using tokens and on-table display materials, or you go to off-table stuff such as paperwork. Now, needless to say, tokens are very popular. Lots of game systems have them. Sometimes those tokens will be very game specific, so something that may only appear in one particular type of game. And often game systems will produce their own tokens that they can sell to you along with the rules, but you can use generic ones as well. So some typical examples, the sort that I've come across on a regular basis will be things like wound or shock tokens, very popular in Two Fat Lardies games, for instance. Counters that do the same sort of thing but record casualties or fatigue in some way. So maybe it's a dial with a number on, or just changing dice to record how many wounds or shock or whatever a unit has got. But then there are also like condition tokens that just to show whether a unit is disorganised, leaderless, pinned, that sort of thing. Some games use order tokens, so where you have to issue orders to units before the moves, so you can put them down and show what orders individual units have got. There are action markers which show when a unit has acted. So when you've got multiple units or multiple individuals in a skirmish game on a table, you can keep track of what's going on. First fire tokens. Now, this is something that's popular in a lot of Stuart's rejects games for Hostess rejects. We often use first fire tokens in things like Napoleonic games and so on, that get taken off once a unit has used that first fire. But there are also things like I've seen lots of people use them, and I use this a lot. Anyone who's followed my blog will know that stat bars that show that are either part of the base with the models, or maybe as a separate bar that goes behind the base, that basically shows some fixed stats for that particular unit. And as I mentioned earlier, it may be you're doing that because every unit's different, and it'll be a lot of admin to keep off table, so you put it with the unit so it can be seen. I'll put some photos as I go along to sort of show you what I mean as well. I will have already done that hopefully by now. There are plenty of examples. Many are specific to certain games. And then the alternative, perhaps I hasten to use the word traditional example, would be paperwork. It achieves the same result as tokens, but typically it's done as an off-table player aid. So this would include things like using roster sheets, something that the Men Would Be Kings, for instance, uses, so that you've got all the detailed stats for individual units written down on a sheet, maybe on a clipboard, that the players can use. Some games just have simple orders of battle, so you know the organisation of armies, so it will list all of the units that belong to a particular battalion or division or whatever. And then I refer to the next one as like character sheets. Now this is not just role-playing games, but maybe small-scale skirmish games where individual figures have particular characteristics and you a little bit more information, more detailed, more personalised. And then of course you've got things like unit cards. Flames of War, for instance, uses unit cards now. And there are other game systems that use the same sort of thing. Now the only problem with things like unit cards is I find you need extra space off the table, so it's almost off table, but it's very much I lump it in with other forms of paperwork. That's why I say it's an off table item. And you know, the benefits of having your admin off table, obviously, is it's a nice clean table. You just have figures and terrain, and it makes for very good photographs. Certainly a less cluttered tabletop. And as I've already suggested, perhaps this is the old school way of doing things. So having broadly discussed the two big types of admin, you know, the tokens versus paperwork, I have to say that my personal preference is I prefer to keep admin on the table rather than off the table. So I use a wide range of acrylic, MDF and even homemade tokens in the games that I play. Even where a game system comes with a roster, so things like the Men Would Be Kings, they provide a roster and you normally would put your stats on there. I've come up with a way of doing it on table using a stat bar to complement the tokens that I'm already going to be using in the game, for instance. My personal preference, you know, I'm not saying that's the way it has to be done, it's just what I prefer to see. You know, and as I say, I like a good stat bar. I've used it in lots of my miniatures. I'll put some photos up. Even if that stat bar is only the name of the unit, I prefer something like that so you can tell which unit is which. Now I have used off-table sheets on clipboards and all that sort of thing, but I personally find it clunky and distracting from the tabletop. You know, I can do it that way, but I prefer not to. I prefer to see all my information on the table. So how do you feel about the use of tokens or other in-game devices versus roster sheets and orders of battle and that sort of thing? Are you old school and prefer a clipboard and a pencil? Or are you an avid collector of expensive tokens, because they are pretty pricey sometimes, fancy widgets and other on-table paraphernalia? As usual, I'd love to hear what your preferences are, but I'd also like to know why you think it's the better alternative. You know, do you think it's an age thing, or is it just the types of games that you play? But I'd love to know why your preference is what it is. And I expect there will be considerable divergence in opinions. Please join the conversation in the comments below, and if you've enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share. And of course, if you want to keep up to date with my weekly postings, videos, please click the bell notification icon. So until next week, keep safe, get as much gaming in as you can, and of course, keep rolling high.